Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Asad Lalji, and I'm delighted to welcome you here to a very special evening and a panel discussion. Avid Learning, in association with Penguin Random House, the Kalagora Association, and the CSMBS, come together to celebrate the Mumbai launch of acclaimed author Amit Chaudhuri's new novella, Friend of My Youth. This book is a tribute to Bombay and its familiar haunts, characters, and happenings. Today's discussion features the author in conversation with columnist, writer, and founder-director of the Mumbai International Literature Festival, Anil Dharker. Both Anil and Amit will revisit a remembered Mumbai and a present-day one, actually remembered Bombay, sorry, while discussing the novel as a new form. But before we begin, I want to take a minute to tell you a little bit about Avid. Most of you all know us, but for those who don't, Avid Learning is a public programming platform of the SR Group, which was started in 2009 to present the best of national and international writers, thinkers, artists, and practitioners in the field of art, literature and heritage, culture, innovation and design through innovative formats like workshops, masterclasses, lecture demonstrations, exhibitions, festivals, and many more. Since our inception, we've done over 700 programs and I've connected with over 65,000 people. And this kind of continues with our mantra of learning never stops. But thank you for being part of this journey with us thus far. Now, coming back to today, most events and discussions like this, you will be told to shut off your phones and put them away. But we're not going to tell you to do that. We're going to say, bring out your phones and get social. What we want you to do is come on, post, repost, tag, follow us, tweet, retweet. Our handles are @AvidLearning and our hashtag is Learning Never Stops. Hope you have a great nostalgic evening down memory lane. But before we begin and Ursula takes you through the bios of our panelists, I'm going to request Amit Chaudhuri and Anil Dharker to come up to officially unveil the book.
Amit, the last book
Yes.
you wrote, we did an event together.
Yeah.
So
Odysseus Abroad, yeah. That's right.
you're making a habit of it.
Yeah. Of writing books or doing events with you.
Of doing events with me.
Right.
I'm glad you're
doing.
doing.
It was a nice
there's a habit
conversation last
of
time.
writing books. I'm glad you're continuing that. There's a lot of people who want to question you, and I'm one of them, as to the kind of books that you write.
Books or the book that I've written?
Books.
Books, yeah.
Which included the last one.
Yes.
And there's a lot of similarity between Odysseus Abroad and this. Because they are, I would call them miniatures. This particular book, which I really love so much, it's a miniature, or it's a minimalistic book. Because there's no narrative as such, there's no story, there's no
Please
plot.
be active on your cell phones and tweet, but put them on silent while you do so. That would be great. Just that one little thing. Sorry, yeah.
And if you want to have a conversation, do it afterwards. So, because there's no plot, there's no action, shall we say. It is just a day and a half in the life of the narrator, who's probably you.
He's called Amit Chaudhuri, but that is no guarantee that there's any kind of relation to myself. Yeah.
There was a particular line in this book where you said, you're defining a novel and you say that the author and the narrator are not the same. It becomes a novel. Even if they share by a sheer coincidence, the same name, but their thought processes are different. The way they think, their worldview, everything is different. Now,
what I said was, I suppose that the narrator's thought processes are, or the characters, who has the same name, are not completely plain to the author. So even if they have the same name, there will be a degree of mystery concerning this particular person who's being written about, as to why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah, but the person I read about, this Amit,
Yes.
to me is Amit, you. It is you. It is not someone else.
It is me. Somebody in the Upanishad said, this is that. So there is a degree of detachment where those texts cover this whole business of who is doing and who is watching. Those texts discuss this and enact this in various ways. I mean, there is the statement saying this is that. There is also the other kind of image. One bird is sitting on the branch and eating the fruit. The other bird is watching. And we know the Upanishads is talking about the same being, but one is captured by desire and the other is a spectator. Or one is enmeshed in action, the other is watching that action. And that is there in all of us. And the book is in a way an exploration of what it might be to write about being and spectating at the same time. And I make that plain at times, that there are all kinds of reasons why one might be part of a narrative, but also making a narrative or watching it happen, being made. There might be all kinds of reasons for that. And having said that, I should also say that just as there is this hidden between the lines, or embedded in all experience of ourself, that there is also the experience of us being aware of ourselves, of us leading a life. Many of us think something is going to happen to us somehow, which makes this life purposeful, even if we end up leading a life without any ostensible purpose. We have this mysterious sense somehow, as if we were in a film, that there was always a particular purpose or sense to this action of our being here. Henry James discusses this in his stories, and discusses the fact that often this sense is a mysterious illusion, because often there is absolutely no purpose to us being here. That there are some of us who go on to maybe become gold medalists or famous scientists or whatever, but most of us don't. And yet all of us are kind of possessed with this sense from time to time that there is a purpose to this narrative.
First of all, that there is a narrative.
That there is a narrative.
There is a narrative, and when you just round the next corner,
yeah,
you'll come across something.
I mean, you will. I once saw a girl crossing the road, and a car went past, and it was honking. Maybe it was even my car. I can't remember now. She made a particular kind of gesture which she couldn't have thought I would have seen, or anybody else would have seen. It was a kind of expression on her face. It was as if she was aware of some invisible camera which none of us could see. The gesture was not a completely private gesture, but it was not meant for me to see either. So who was she making that gesture for? I mean, we have done that often. Yes, some of us jokingly would also refer to ourselves now and again in the third person. He said, mockingly. We will say that. Muriel Sparks' book, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, has a child constantly making up stories about what she's doing at that point of time. So why are we possessed with both a sense of being in action and being detached from it? So I think this is partly where this Amit Chaudhuri is where he finds himself.
Incidentally, the book is about Amit Chaudhuri coming to Bombay. There's a new book, and he's going to launch it, and he's going to read from it. And he's come to Bombay after a long time, and so he's waiting for that evening when he's going to actually do the reading. And he revisits all of the old places which he hadn't been to for a long time. And brings back memories of that, of the years ago when he was in school. He was in cathedral school. And as he grew up, he was living with his parents. And so when I say that there's confusion about whether this is actually Amit Chaudhuri or not, you can't blame me or the reader, right?
There's meant to be confusion. Okay. I mean, there's meant to be a sense of this reference. Just as in Odysseus abroad, you are meant to understand that some of the references are deliberate. The reference to the fact that a day in London is referring to the Odyssey is something that you're meant to recognize. The fact that a day in London in a person's life who led, a person called Ananda, who led a life somewhat like mine in the 80s, is being inserted into the story of the Odyssey is also meant to be recognized. That how extraordinary, how banal, how absurd that somebody like Amit Chaudhuri, although his name is Ananda in this novel, should be part of something like the Homeric Odyssey. This absurdity is also meant to be recognized in that book. So one is working with material that exists and then putting it, placing it, situating it in inappropriate contexts. And that is what creativity is about. It is not about placing something in an appropriate context. It is widening our sense of what might be appropriate in terms of where we might find a particular piece of information or a reference to something. So the moment Joyce decided to recast the Odyssey in Dublin and made a Jewish, petit bourgeois Jewish man who was a canvasser, Ulysses or Odysseus, he was doing something inappropriate again. He was doing something absurd. How on earth would a petit bourgeois, a Jewish man in Dublin, in what way does he qualify as Ulysses? So certain convergences take place which lead to that creative exploration. The convergences never take cognizance of what is appropriate or what seems logical. They take place without any cognition of those things. In fact, they want to extend what we understand to be appropriate.
Yeah, but what you seem to suggest is that we are always watching ourselves. That I went through that phase in my teenage years when I thought, as if there was, you mentioned a camera, as if there's a camera watching me. I don't know how many of you go through life feeling that you're playing to an invisible audience, right? So that is what I think you're suggesting.
Yeah, I'm suggesting. I'm talking about this sense of a self that is part of the action and a sense of the self which is looking at that action, which is always there. I'm just exploring it. It is not possible also to write in this particular way while adopting the form of the memoir or the autobiography. And I've never done that. I'm not interested in the autobiography as a form, as a genre, because I'm not interested in telling people about my life. Over here, for instance, I'm talking about 2 days or 1.5 days.
This could be a day and a half in the life of Amit Chaudhuri.
A day and a half. Yeah. Now this is again not an appropriate duration for a memoir. A memoir must begin somewhere and end somewhere, and it's not a day and a half that is taken up in a memoir. Secondly, an autobiography is usually a collection of various kinds of moments in a life, including crucially the important moments in one's life. I never give the reader the important moments in my life. I only give them the unimportant moments, where the person is doing nothing and looking out or remembering or thinking. This is what I'm focused on. So it is not, again, an appropriate way of writing a memoir or autobiography.
But it's also not an appropriate way of writing a novel.
No, it isn't.
In the accepted sense, because there is no event happening in the whole book. There's just no event.
No. And that has been true right from the beginning.
Even Amit's friend, who's the one he wants to see, he goes through this he almost dies of a drug overdose in the past. But even that you play down so much, whereas it could have become the central point and a huge event in the book.
Yeah.
But you just played it down. It's almost mentioned in passing that you get a phone call and you ring up the father and that's it. So why do you feel that you have to play these things on? Why do you not want to build up to some kind of a big bang and then continue the story?
You wouldn't have had this book or my body of work if I was that kind of a writer, right? So the reason I don't want to do that is because I'm not a humanist, in the sense that I do not think that character and the human being or a particular protagonist or the hero is at the center of the universe. I think various things comprise or constitute the universe, and human beings are one of them. In a city, there are objects, there are sounds, there are things which are visible, there are things which are invisible, which comprise where we are. I'm interested in all of these. If I were a different kind of writer who approached the novel in a different kind of way, then I would be seeing the novel and its backdrop as a kind of photographer's studio in which I place a protagonist, the man whose portrait is about to be taken. And the portrait of the man about to be taken is the subject of the photograph. The backdrop is what accommodates that figure. To me, the world is not a photographer's studio for the human being and his story in the center or her story in the center. I'm equally interested in that studio and every detail of what's happening around the person. So it's because I'm not, I mean, this...
Why a photographer's studio? Why not a movie?
A movie?
Because a movie, there is action, there's a lot of things happening. Other people impinge on the protagonist. Events impinge on the protagonist, and his life changes.
There are different kinds of movies. You can have a movie where basically the movie centers on like narrative, like novels, centers on what is happening, the story of the person who is supposed to be at the center of the universe and of that movie. And everything else is the backdrop to what's happening to that person and is important only in as much as it is part of that story of that person. But there are other kind of movies where you're being shown something, but you're also being given something which is not in the frame and has no connection with what is happening in the frame, and you will never know the connection of that other story, which is woven in and out fleetingly from what's happening in the frame. And I'll explain what I mean. By this I mean specifically, let us say, the soundtracks in the films of Satyajit Ray or a particular film by Jean Renoir called The River. And Jean Renoir is, of course, a filmmaker that Satyajit studied and loved. The River is the first film, underrated though it is, where you have this extraordinary soundtrack of random sounds taking place while a story is unfolding. The random sounds are what comprise our life in India, that is... do you hear that sound? Yeah. So...
Thank you, Asad, that was planned.
Now that sound has no direct bearing on what's happening in the frame. And there are many such sounds in the river. Renoir's soundtrack is a reminder that our lives are impacted constantly by the invisible. That is something we can hear but cannot see. And this invisible has no direct relation to the core of what's happening with you and me. It's a story which we will never know. It's an irrelevance. It's an inadvertent element of the narrative which only certain people will give some importance to. Renoir is giving importance to it without making it emphatic, but he's giving importance to it. That I want to make this part of the frame. I'll never explain why it's there. Shutritra is doing the same. There are all kinds of sounds in his soundtrack which has nothing to do with the story, which are telling you other stories, which are invisible. The visible story is what's happening to the characters. The invisible stories are momentary and recurrent in his films, and they come through the soundtrack. So that is taking us out of the photographer's studio. That is taking us out of the idea of the backdrop. It's showing us how we are constantly being impacted by stories which are momentary, which are not part of the main story, which matter. So for me, the whole idea of a main story, a big bang, is boring, is not of interest. What is of interest to me is this, what we just heard.
You mentioned in the book that this title, which is a lovely title, Friend of My Youth.
Yeah, it's leaked from Alice Monroe.
This is an Alice Monroe story.
Yeah, as I say in the book.
Is that how the idea came up?
No. The idea came up. Let me.
No, the title was not the trigger for the book.
No, the title wasn't the trigger. As Anil was saying, I mean, let me just add to what Anil said to summarize what the book is about. That the book is in 3 parts. The first part comprises the main part of this very short book. It comprises 2/3 of this novel, and over here we see Amit Chaudhuri, a writer who has, at this point of time, has written 5 novels, arrives in Bombay, the city in which he grew up, but where he no longer has a home. He's come to do a one-off random reading from his last novel, The Immortals. And he's staying, this is early 2011, and he's staying in a club in Malabar Hill, which is the area in which he grew up. And one of the things that occurs to him, and this could be one of the triggers, is that I stay in hotel rooms or in club rooms in the city in which I grew up, and which I rather detested when growing up. But this is my position over here of a transient. I do not have a place here anymore. It just so happens that the club is right behind a building, and the building is the building in which he grew up in Malabar Hill. So occasionally he becomes aware of this building, and he looks up and tries to count the floor of right up to the 12th story to see the balcony from where he would look out unhappily when he was small. So that is one thing going on.
Just a small point, because then I'm tempted to ask, did you actually live in Il Palazzo?
Sorry?
Did you actually live in Il Palazzo?
I did live in Il Palazzo. Yeah.
This is where you will get a problem. It's his life, and yet he claims it's not his life.
Yeah, it's
and he's staying at the WIA club, and he's looking at Il Palazzo, and he's looking at the tennis courts, and
yes.
he's ordering chutney sandwiches, which apparently are very good, though I think the mutton samosas are better. And he walks on Little Gibbs Road, which is where I've lived for many, many years.
Yeah.
So for me, by the way, the particular book has a particular resonance.
Yes.
Everything we write about, I have experienced for so many years.
Yes.
But
you know, Anil,
what you're
a lot of people
you're mixing up your reader. You're mixing me up.
I mean to mix you up. You know, I do not want. I mean, I'm exploring this imaginative terrain, I do not want to observe too closely these demarcations between what constitutes fiction as we understand it and what constitutes poetry and what constitutes the essay. I want to test those boundaries. It's useless to be bound by these boundaries, and I think people in other art forms, in cinema, have tested these boundaries maybe far more courageously than novelists have, but novelists have too. I mean, Virginia Woolf and Proust, the modernists, did test these boundaries all the time. And Proust writes about Marcel, you know, and Proust, of course, is mentioned over here in passing. Virginia Woolf, while writing to the lighthouse, writes a letter to a friend of hers saying, I don't like the word novel anymore. I do not think it applies to the lighthouse. You know, she's looking for a new word to encompass this kind of narrative that she's doing. So, so to go back to the triggers again, so this is one thing of coming back to the city and finding one is staying in a hotel room, and maybe even inadvertently noticing that the house in which one grew up is over there, right behind one. That's one thing. The other is this friend whom he has known from childhood and who is the only surviving school friend in the city that he is still in touch with, is now in rehab in Alibag, and in a kind of severe kind of regime where he's not supposed to access the outer world for about 2 years.
He can't come on the phone.
He can't come out. He can have a monthly conversation with his family. He's been slipping in and out of addiction for years and years and years, and now, as a kind of last resort, he's in that rehab. So, Amit Chaudhuri is in this city, and he discovers he cannot access this person, and it unsettles him strangely in a way that he would not have foreseen. So 3 years ago, 4 years ago, he would not have thought that if this person suddenly became absent, I'm going to be shaky during my trips in Bombay. So he's surprised to register this sense of unsettlement. That's the second thing. The third thing is this visit to the Taj with shoes, his mother's shoes, which he has to exchange for another pair of shoes at Joy Shoes. So now
there's a shoe shop in the Taj, in the book, called Joy Shoes.
Yeah.
And the owner of that is a certain gentleman called Munna,
Yeah.
who
also figures...
may be real, may not be real, though he is sitting here, but he may not be real. So
goes to the Marine Drive, he will sit with his back to the sea, as many people do. So now, he goes to the Taj, and he sees the Taj looking as it did, and he knows that the Taj is what it is, but that what he's seeing is also partly an illusion, because so much of it was destroyed and rebuilt.
Because 26/11 happened.
Because of 26/11. So again, he has the sense of a city that's the same but completely different. A self that's the same but completely different. The transformation is there, but it's not always visible. The transformation is subterranean, is a subtext, or it's erased. Transformation itself is erased. So he goes to Joy Shoes, hangs out for a while with Munna, and then he goes to the Sea Lounge. Again, this is a part of his life that he always wanted to leave behind. And he did leave behind. But he's making these periodic visits to survey in what way his past still remains in these places. The past he wanted to leave behind. And he goes into the Sea Lounge, and there is the Sea Lounge. It's exactly what it used to be. The man is playing the piano. He's playing a Carpenter song on the piano, etc. He wants to go and have a cup of coffee over there, just as an excuse to be there. And he again knows he's participating in an illusion, because the Sea Lounge was completely gutted. In what way has it been put together again? The narrator compares it to, not so much to a reconstruction, the Sea Lounge being reopened, not a reconstruction, but to a film of a destruction being played backwards. So if you play a film of an explosion backwards, you have the shards flying back into place until what has exploded will be there again, whole, complete. And this is it's as if he's seeing reverse time when he is looking at the sea lounge. Not a recomposition at all, but a played back film. This is what the first 1.5 days is about. Anil was disappointed that there was no actual kind of climax with the reading being portrayed. So the reading for which he's come is actually never shown. Now
I thought you were going to lead up
I'm joking.
To the reading we had together. So I was waiting for my name to appear.
Absolutely. Then you could have been here, not here as well. But and the second and third part, which are very short, have to do with him returning to Bombay for the Kala Ghoda festival, as it happens. And he comes back for the Kala Ghoda festival, and this time Ramu, his friend, is there. He has kind of got out of rehab earlier than he was supposed to, and he's there. And there are two changes that have happened in their lives. Their fathers have died in this period. And the other thing is, Ramu, who is a Luddite, has a cell phone. That's the other change. This is the second bit. The last bit, Amit and his family decide to come and spend time in the Taj, where they've never stayed before. In this kind of house of life, what Walter Benjamin calls the house of life, with its destruction and its hidden antiquities. So one of the triggers was also this passage with which this book begins, which I have not included as an epigraph, but as part of the narrative, this passage from One Way Street by Walter Benjamin, where Benjamin is talking about a dream in which he dreamt of the first friend of his youth, being reunited with the first friend of his youth, only to wake up and realize that the friend was dead. So that was the trigger. Reading that passage jolted me. And the passage also contains this idea of being in a city which is under attack. So those things came, these are the kind of threads that one is trying to weave over here.
Would you like to read a passage? It'd be nice.
I'm going to read from the end of the long first section that are described. So I'm going to read from the end of that. As I said, he arrives on a particular day, he goes to Joy Shoes, etc. That evening he's at a loose end, and the next day he has a reading which is never described. During that day he's thinking of Ramu, he's thinking of various things. He has a meeting with the sales rep of the company that published the Immortals. Here is complete fiction, because the Immortals was published by Picador. Well, this is a Penguin book, and there's a conflation of these personalities. So do not believe the sales rep at all has a real counterpart. So meets up with the sales rep, and first there's an interview in the morning, and then he circles around Malabar Hill, visits the infant school of Cathedral School, which is mentioned only once by name. Then they go to Britannia restaurant because the narrator loves Parsi food. And when he was growing up in Bombay, he had to depend on being invited to Navjot ceremonies or Parsi weddings to eat Parsi food, and he had no idea of these Parsi restaurants. So much of Bombay is being discovered by this man in his afterlife in Bombay, as I call it, in this posthumous existence in Bombay. That's when he's discovering things which he didn't know before. So he goes and has Parsi food at Britannia, and then there's a little signing session at Strand Bookstore. And this is the end of this particular section, the Strand Bookstall signing, and then he's going out, walking at a loose end with nothing to do to kill time until the reading at 6:30. So I'm just going to read out this bit. By the time we reach Strand bookstall, I never want to think of food again. So he's just had Bombay and other stuff at Britannia. I never... And berry pulao, of course. You have to have that once you're there. So he's at Bombay and berry pulao, so he never wants to think of food again. This is not a book signing, it's an impromptu visit organized by Janardhan. This is this mysterious sales rep. Nevertheless, they've placed a stack of the Immortals on a table. I start signing, my back receiving a blast of cold air. Shanbag died 2 years ago. I met him here when Afternoon Rag was published. I had no idea he was a legend or even who he was. I realized I was being presented. He created the bookshop, a distributor whispered. I turned into the schoolboy who used to come here once. School didn't seem very long ago in 1993. Afternoon Rag was my second novel. I didn't feel like a writer, though I wanted to be treated like one. You like Chinese food? Said Shanbag. You eat lobster? He took my wife to the captain's bar at the Taj and ordered lobster, salt and pepper. The bar was dark. Signing done, I'm drawn to the titles around me. It's difficult to maneuver within. Books take up most of the space. But I'm sensing a petering out. Is it to do with a change of direction? Next to my novel is piled a book on the Buddha I've never heard of, and next to that, a pile of horoscopes. I have at home an anthology that I bought from Strand bookstall when I was 18. Rene and T. Weiss's contemporary poetry. I remember eyeing it, picking it up, coveting it. I wanted it for the names, C.P. Cavafy, A.R. Ammons, Hans Magnus Enzensberger. I let a year pass before parting with whatever the equivalent of $7.50 was that year. It was a magical time. You read what you pleased. Finding any good books, sir? Asked Janardhan at my shoulder. Some. This is me speaking to Janardhan, or Amit Chaudhuri, not me. Some. When I was 15, I came here for James Hadley Chase. I can't say if Janardhan knows Hadley Chase. We read him to be grown up. It was the sex that marked him as a serious writer, as it had Nick Carter. At 15, I had no inkling of Cavafy and poetry. That would come the following year. You came often, sir. Almost every day after school. It's 10 minutes away. Cathedral. He nods, somber. I turn to the passage at the back, linger before sociology texts and a smattering of recent Indian novels, and come out onto the other side of the small room. The location of the poetry section is still at the bottom shelves on the right. There's a steel chair there. I sit and peer below. Chaucer, W.H. Auden. The 3 shelves are full, but the range is curtailed. I see some friends and acquaintances. Ranjit Hoskote, Anand Thakur, Arundhati Subramanian. The last 2 were in the group that accompanied me to dinner a year and a half ago. After a reading, Ramu was there. He made no secret of the fact that he felt uncomfortable with the poets. We went into the back streets of Kala Ghoda to dine at Trishna. Naturally, no tables were available. Ramu dissuaded us from waiting outside and plugged Apurva. So we had that celebratory meal at Apurva, and Ramu didn't let me order pomfret because he claimed Ravas is a better fish. This is quite expected. I don't eat pomfret when I'm with Ramu because he prefers Ravas and surmai. He hardly eats out. I seldom eat pomfret these days because you don't get good pomfret in Calcutta. People think I must love fish because I'm a Bengali, but the truth is that having grown up in Bombay, I only eat sea fish. I generally abhor the freshwater fish you get in Calcutta. In Bombay, I eat pomfret when I can, but Ramu won't let me. He's convinced I'm going to be converted to Ravas, which is what we ordered that night at Apurva. Flat, grilled pieces like bits of wood. I step out, book in one hand. It's 6 memos for the next millennium. Some books I buy for their title, others for brevity. I love short books, the way you know from the first page that it's going to end. So I'll see you at 6:15. The reading is at 6:30. We've been speculating on the possible size of the audience. It's hard to shepherd people into readings in Bombay. Janardhan shakes his head in agreement. It's 3:30. I cross the road, stacks of sugar cane being pulped by an old flecked grinder, 3 flattened bouquets, pale green juice, high risk of jaundice if you drink a glass. Meal at Apurva. I haven't seen Ramu since. I've often thought of my last sighting of him in front of the yacht club at night. It's only occurred to me now that, of course, it was after the reading, that abortive jaunt to Trishna, the Ravas at Apurva. A long table, Ramu making semi-serious conversation with Arundhati, Arundhati's steely indifference when Anand burst into a raga, Anand and Menaka suddenly talking to each other, mildly combative in French. Later, the contingent began to walk to Regal Cinema. Not that late, 11 o'clock, through the dark arcade. Anand following one demonstration of a raga with another. We lost Ramu and a young short story writer called Sumit. For 7 or 8 minutes, they were absent. Then, as we came to the wide angles of Kala Ghoda, they emerged from a back street, sheepish and triumphant. Fair weather friends. I couldn't tell if they'd had a joint or if Ramu was still clean. People began to get into the silently lined and watching taxis. It's odd how unself-conscious and at home people are in this part of the city, but how, come midnight, they'll start returning to Juhu and Bandra an hour away. Waves and farewells. Yet 2 or 3 of us decided to catch a final glimpse of Apollo Bandar. Ramu was terribly tired and opted out. I suspect he'd had enough of the writers. Fuck, it was an effort to lift one foot after another, he told me on the phone the next day. It was as if the distance from Rhythm House to Regal was a mile. I was wondering when it would end. He'd parked his scooter at the yacht club. We said bye to him there. A part of me felt bad, don't know why, leaving him, as if I were deserting him. Ramu prodding the pedal repeatedly with one foot till the familiar racket began. Under a Gothic arch. I thought I'd see him again, somehow. The uncertainty I feel about whether I'll see Ramu again came to me once before. Of course, I know the formulation is absurd. It's not whether I'll see him, but when. According to his sister, it will be another year. What I feel isn't so much like parental anxiety. With the prolonged absence of a child, say, the irrational part of the parent's brain will rush to the possibility of never seeing the child again. This isn't what I feel. I know I'll see Ramu again, but it's as if I won't see him again. I'm thrown off balance, but also surprised. I didn't know I'd react like this. Ramu isn't the only close friend I have, but it's as if my sojourn in Bombay depends on him. Depends is the wrong word. I haven't come here because of him to delve into his whereabouts. But the surprise I've mentioned is related to my astonishment at being here. Astonishment denotes how you might start seeing things you hadn't noticed earlier, but it could also mean becoming aware that you won't see them again. As I turn into Firoz Shah Mehta Road and then left into the long stretch of DN Road, I know I won't see Bombay again. That is, I will see Bombay again, but not the Bombay I'm looking at now. I belch and release the ghost of Bombay. I think I'll stop there.
Lovely, thank you. Why does Amit Chaudhuri in the book dislike Bombay so much?
He loves Bombay.
No, he loves it now, but why did he dislike it earlier?
I mean, I don't know about this Amit Chaudhuri character, but speaking for myself, I dislike every, I dislike the places that I'm in. I've disliked many, many places which I've had very close emotional associations with, England being one of them,
You mentioned Oxford as being something we didn't want to remember.
Yeah, Oxford, I used to hate Oxford. And Calcutta, I lived there now part of the year, so that means I dislike it. I dislike it thoroughly. When I was growing up here, I loved Calcutta.
So are you perpetually unhappy then?
I'm perpetually unhappy. I'm a connoisseur of unhappiness. Seriously. But with Bombay, I think there were the things which made me unhappy, which my conscious mind knew as sources of unhappiness. Had to do with, well, firstly, school. I hated school. I hated cathedral school. I hated all school. And then I didn't like the corporate world in which I was growing up in. I loved my parents. I thought I now realize they're extraordinary people. But it's only after they moved to Bandra to St. Cyril Road that I realized how much I love looking out onto a street and how I would give up the view of the Marine Drive and the sea for a view of a balcony opposite with a Parsi couple sitting in it, which is what happened in St. Cyril Road. There was a Parsi couple where the woman used to shout loudly at the man from time to time, and he was very stoic, he would never answer. And there was no sea view at all. And I realized that this scene is for me far more important than the view from Il Palazzo. So I was missing the intimacy and the ghostly life of participating in street life that you get when you are standing on the balcony of a third-story apartment, especially in those days in Bandra, which was already changing.
Is that because you could look into other lives?
I could look into other lives. As I say over here, both Ramu and Amit Chaudhuri are fantasists. They look at buildings, they look at houses, and they are transfixed by houses. Especially houses which have some kind of a character, and they're transfixed, they desire them. They desire them, as I say, not to own them, but they desire to be taken into another time when they look at these houses. So they are fantasists. So with me too, I'm a fantasist. I'd look at the balcony. I mean, the sea doesn't satisfy any fantasy as such, at least not for me. Maybe if I was a sailor or a pirate in another age, it would have kind of provoked some emotion, but not for me in Il Palazzo. So that is the corporate life in Malabar Hill, the school. I would also say, having been exposed to this extraordinary cosmopolitan literature and life in Bengal and in the Bengali language, I felt at that time that there was the English language life in Bombay and the pedigree attached, the social pedigree attached to the English language was a sham. And maybe I was young and harshly judgmental, but I didn't like it. And I didn't like the fact that people who who didn't speak English well were called vernacs in this world. So these were the things which kind of alienated me.
It was pretentious.
Pretentious, and I mean, we all are pretentious, whichever language we speak in from time to time. But I think there was a kind of complacency which used to disturb me.
But Bengalis are great snobs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, what's wrong with English-speaking snobs?
No, I don't think Bombay people were snobs openly. I think that they were very open, very egalitarian in many ways. I've found, for instance, poets like, for instance, just to talk about the English-speaking world, I mean, poets like Nissim Ezekiel, who presided over the city's poets in many ways, and Adil Jassawala, extremely sharp and extremely interesting man, to be very, very democratic. I mean, in a way that their counterparts in Bengal or other parts of India. I'm not sure how democratic they would be in taking 17-year-olds as seriously as they did, or as equals. So in that sense, they're not snobbish. But I think the whole business of associating a particular, and here I'm not talking about the likes of Ezekiel or Jasawala, who are extraordinary people, not least because of the way they wrote about art. They were among the first people to identify how interesting Bhupen Khakar was as a painter, and be able to articulate it in a country where art criticism is poor on the whole. So those were extraordinary people. But on the whole, this matter of this unexamined pedigree to do with English, which continues, I think, to this day. Today, I think the people showing off that pedigree are the Hindi film stars. When I was growing up, it was Phool Khile Hai Gulshan Gulshan. But Tabassum was the interviewer. And the Hindi film stars then didn't speak in English. They spoke very good Hindi, Hindustani. Now they don't seem to know Hindi. They only speak in English. And those shows seem mainly there to demonstrate their facility in the English language. I mean, it's an exhibition of a kind of ease with the English language rather than anything else. So I find, but there is, with a kind of interest in the English language and even snobbery about it, must come a more serious attachment to the language, to English, or whichever language you espouse. And I don't think that we've had that serious attachment as much as one should have, given that English was so central over here to a certain class. So I'm sort of just talking about certain reservations. Despite that, of course, there are many things in Bombay that I absolutely am smitten by.
But you like it now. You like Bombay now.
I like Bombay now. I do like Bombay now. I mean,
you don't find it getting more provincial?
No, I mean, I say I like
in
Bombay.
In spite of the cosmopolitanism, the point
is the odd thing about
the Shiv Sainiks and so on, that influence.
Yeah, cities like Bombay, there aren't that many cities, but London is is another city, which was transformed by the free market. When I was in London in the early 80s as a student, because I did my first degree at University College London, it was very bleak. I'm not only talking about the racism. It was generally kind of embodied a kind of bleakness, which now has changed. Of course, now after Brexit, it might go back to that kind of bleakness. But just the sheer flow of people into the city, but also the flow of capital. London has been sucking capital from every other part of the country to be what it is. But you feel, as you go there, that sense of aliveness. It's illusory to a certain extent, because not very many people can afford to be there in London, in those alive parts, except briefly as visitors. Here in Bombay, I also felt that, when I was growing up in the kind of, my memories go back to the 60s, late 60s, 70s, of course. And at that time, Calcutta was an amazingly vibrant city. It was a really interesting city. After globalization, after economic deregulation, Calcutta didn't cooperate with those kind of changes and closed itself in a way. Well, Bombay opened up in every kind of way, and I think that energized this city. It did energize the city. But at the same time, of course, as you mentioned, there are all kinds of things which make one ambivalent, maybe not hate the city, but ambivalent about it. You mentioned the Shiv Sena. That kind of politics, which was happening even in the 80s, becoming sort of vocal in the 80s, and that kind of provincialism. Yes, I mean those things are worrying. So is the kind of the kind of infantile optimism of Bombay to a certain extent, where people are always feeling happy over here. That's one of the nice things about Bombay, but it's also something that slightly sort of worrying when you see the kind of discrepancies in lifestyles over here. So yeah, but I think this is now the great Indian city at this point of time and has been since the 90s.
Well, I'm sure you'll think that till the time when you come to live here.
Yeah, when I live here, then I'll be praising another city.
Then you'll be praising
Yeah.
Calcutta too.
Yeah.
So, should we go to the audience for questions at this point?
One small question I had is the plotlessness in your novel a literary device for a rootlessness or a kind of restlessness in the mind of the protagonist?
The plotlessness is not something that I'm conscious of doing. It's been pointed out to me by others. Since to me, what is called plot is not of any intrinsic interest. You know, there are books and books with plot, and about 99% of them are boring, extremely boring. You know, even popular novels. I mean, most of them are unreadable, and not because they're stupid, but simply because they're so boring. So the idea that popular novels or novels with plot are somehow intrinsically interesting is a kind of religious article of faith. You know, it doesn't bear up to scrutiny. I never thought about plotless. I thought about what is interesting, and for me, what was interesting is this kind of opening up, in which are making space for the random, because the random to me is the most interesting part of one's existence. So to close down writing against the random would be a great pity. Then one would be producing dead stuff, you know. But you can write detective novels and you can still be open to the random. Like Hitchcock, the filmmaker Hitchcock, was open to all kinds of things. So the question of whether or not it's plotless doesn't matter to me as much as whether there's enough of a dynamic space for all kinds of things, including random things, to flow in and out of what's being shown and the world that's being shown to us.
Thank you.
Hi, so I had a question that really is trying to understand, probably when you were writing this book, it was in parallel, so you're writing about Bombay and you're reminiscing on certain aspects of your early years here, and you're also simultaneously actively developing and advocating a preservation campaign in Kolkata. And I kind of now begin, and I'm not sure how many people here know about that initiative, but I'm kind of beginning to see connections between the youth that you talk about here, and you know how you were so comfortable when you moved to Bandra, but not so much when you were in Malabar Hill, and how the inflow of impatient capital has probably not allowed certain things to be saved in Bombay. And is that one of the reasons, or you know, are there threads that get carried forward in what you're trying to save in Calcutta? So if you could just kind of talk a bit about how these early years of yours in Bombay then beyond the written word enable you to act in different ways for heritage in a different city.
Okay. I don't know, because so she's referring to this campaign or movement that I kind of started in Calcutta in order to protect the very distinctive neighborhoods and buildings of those neighborhoods, which came into existence in the 1920s, 1930s. Art Deco styles, but also a mixture of features like red oxide stone floors, slatted windows which would have come from France, open rooftop terraces, long verandas, ventilators carved into the side of walls. However, no two houses having the same pattern of for those ventilators. Round knockers on doors. Each street in South Calcutta and in other parts of Calcutta too had these houses with these features. But what was remarkable about Calcutta is that no two houses were built on the same design. There was no identical design. Family resemblances, but houses with a multiplicity of design from street to street. And these were now going. And I was saying that these are not old houses, they are the houses of Calcutta's modernity, which is its great period from the late 19th century onwards. And these are houses which also came into existence after Calcutta had stopped being a capital, and yet are testament to the fact of how interesting it was as a city. And the important thing about these houses is that they were not under any heritage list, and they did not form a kind of notion, conventionally speaking, of heritage. By heritage we understood a monument, a landmark, a grand colonial building which maybe had a grand governmental function, or a building such as might have been visited or lived in by the Tagores, or some well-known Renaissance, Bengal Renaissance personality. And these were not. These were like houses built by lawyers, doctors, middle class, upper middle class people, in the even academics in the 20s, 30s. So it was a process of trying to make people understand that let us go beyond heritage and try and understand what is going on in these houses of modernity, the modern. These old houses are also new houses. They are not, that is to say, they do not represent culture in the way a temple or the Taj Mahal does. They are residences of lawyers and doctors in the 20s and 30s. So when I was growing up in Bombay, Kamalika, what I can say is that Bombay gave me, in a way, because I was an outsider to Calcutta, gave me the eyes to see these houses. If I had grown up in Calcutta, of course I was always attracted to the ordinary and to the importance of the ordinary. That is, the monumental never interested me as much as these ordinary houses. So that attraction, that allure of the bourgeois, the middle class, the ordinary, was always there, more powerful for me than a palace, But having grown up in Bombay, where the houses are quite different, you have these neo-Gothic buildings. You also have these slanted roofs with Mangalore tiles, which you don't have in Calcutta. Growing up in Bombay gave me the eyes, I think, as an outsider to see. I'm an outsider in Calcutta. I have written about Bengal, and people think I'm a Bengali and a rooted Bengali, but actually I'm an outsider. And the reason I'm looking at those houses in that way is because I grew up in Bombay. If I had grown up in Calcutta, I may have felt nothing about them except a vague kind of sense that Purono Badi, old houses, how sad that they're going, my uncle used to live there. The importance of them comes to me from having traveled and having looked at various kind of cities, but also having grown up here, and that giving me the eyes of an outsider. That's the only thing I can say.
Just one small point, what you're saying. See, this is a perennial kind of argument between what we call progress and preserving the past. And sometimes you're trying to preserve a past which is not significant, or even if it is significant, then let's take the Bombay textile mills or Bombay's chawls. They have outlived their lives and their purpose. So do we just keep them as monuments, or do we get rid of them and construct a mall or a more modern residential building? I think these are points which come across in every city, everywhere in the world. So maybe trying to keep alive something which has become redundant is futile, maybe.
I don't think these spaces become redundant. In other cities of the world, we've seen that these very modern spaces, which are not monumental, but are historic and playful at the same time. That is, residential buildings, parts of Berlin are like that, are where renewal can take place in terms of creative things happening there. In Berlin, for instance, you talk about the chawl in Bombay. In Berlin, after the wall came down, you had East Berlin. And East Berlin had a lot of prefabricated socialist architecture built where residences were concerned for the purposes of socialist housing. People began to come in from outside, and mainly artists, in the 90s, and began to live in these houses in Prenzlauer Berg, these prefabricated socialist housing. They found them fascinating, and they took advantage of the low rents, and they turned these areas into vibrant areas. Not at that time, these areas were not gentrified, and they meant that people from West Berlin were going all the time to East Berlin to participate in something, to participate in that life that had been created by this possibility. So if you create quarantined spaces for culture and utopian spaces, like in Calcutta, there is a part of Calcutta which is called the New Town, which came up. When did it come up? In the 90s? Yeah, late 90s it came up. And in New Town is full of quarantined cultural institutions which are hardly used, and they're like utopian. Like there's a place called Robi Tirtho, Rabindranath Tagore Tirtho, the pilgrimage. And this is kind of a auditorium and other things. And it's a ghastly caricature and very frozen utopian version of what one might think a pilgrimage site, which is also an auditorium for Tagore, might be. But if you look at Shantiniketan, Tagore's Shantiniketan, which now people want to see as a pilgrimage site for Tagore, but actually it's a very experimental avant-garde kind of space. All the houses there are built by somebody who has no sense of reverence for some static past, but is doing an experiment with buildings, if you look at the campus. So I would say that reuse, those neighborhoods are always going to have some kind of excitement about them, and will host creativity in a far more interesting way, as we've seen in places like Berlin, than a quarantined kind of, sort of space artificially created in the middle of nowhere.
Maybe we can continue this discussion at the Kala-Agora festival, which will be the appropriate space for it. And I'm getting signals that we should wind up. So, Amit, thank you so much for a wonderful evening. And thank you, audience.
Thank you, Anil, and thanks, guys, Asad, and this audience, this lovely audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chaudhuri and Mr. Dharker, for a very absorbing discussion. And congratulations once again, Amit, for the launch of your new book. We'd like to thank Penguin Random House, Kala-Agora Association, and the museum, CSMVS, for collaborating with us for this event today. Do stay tuned onto Avid for more. We have a number of interesting workshops coming up, including architectural photography and screenwriting. So stay engaged, stay social, and remember, learning never stops. Have a great evening. Thank you.